Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchball, and we're continuing our discussion series, our interview series on strategic thinking. Today, we have a longtime friend of mine, Nathan Holt, who I've worked with for quite a long time, to talk to us about his views on strategic thinking. So, Nathan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I mean, before I even go there, Jamie, I'd like to just start by saying thank you for all your wisdom that you share in your latest book, People Solve Problems. I have actually right here behind me. I can't think of a company that wouldn't benefit from the insights you share on creating problem solving culture. And just wanted to say really thank you for the hard work there.
Oh, thank you.
um, You know, I, Jamie, I think for me, if I sort of reflect on, what got me to where I am today, I grew up in a humble home, um, and I'd say somewhat limited resources in a way. And but despite that, I've always had this belief in the possible, and I really think that gave birth to what I've come to learn is a never-ending curiosity to learn. And I think it's kind of sprouted into a desire to really help people and organizations achieve their potential. And as I reflect on my professional career, it's really been a blend of consultant and in-house, kind of roles. And I've had the privilege to support or drive, I would say, probably greater than 25 company or division performance turnarounds. And this is really where I think I've gained the most profound experience in strategy, organizational excellence, and continuous improvement in those roles. If I sort of, fast forward to the past decade, I've had a tremendous opportunity as head of continuous improvement for Shell to position and transform Shell into what I would say is an agile and reimagined low carbon company. And at the same time, we did it by regaining industry leadership and total shareholder return, and while increasing leadership diversity. So a lot to be proud of there. If I fast forward even to today, I think so. What comes to mind for me is like we have a bigger opportunity. We have a bigger opportunity, I think, Jamie, to help the energy industry at large to successfully deliver on the climate change commitments they have. And I think that's kind of like the next big driver for me. I think the targets are ambitious. We have to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and basically reduce emissions in half by 2030. And I believe what's happening today requires energy companies to adopt lean. And that's not to say that the imperative is actually to become more leaner or to become agile, but I think it's really a need to be more responsive and resilient at a time of climate change. So that's why in recent months, I've decided to create a coaching firm with a mission to partner with energy company leaders in building their organizational excellence. So, that's I think pretty exciting for me. We're in the beginnings of that, trying to figure out, how do we start this up? But our purpose is pretty clear. It's about transforming organization potential into ultimate performance. And our vision is if we can make better energy organizations, we're going to get better impact for all stakeholders, employees, the environment, society, and shareholders. We expect there's going to be some major challenges that have to be overcome, that energy companies are going to have to overcome. And I think with the lean experience and the transformation experience that we've gained and the kind of roles we've had, Jamie, I think it's a good marriage where we can have some real purpose driven applications of the kinds of things that we enjoy doing. So that I'm really excited about that.
That's a great context. First, I love the term belief in the possible. I think that's the spirit of strategy and the spirit of continuous improvement. And I've said for a long time, I believe lean isn't the end, lean is a means to an end. And so you're sort of defining a very specific set of ends for the energy industry. And I love how you've connected, it's not just about emissions, right? It's also about connecting that to shareholder return and leadership diversity and all these other things. So that experience you had at Shell, paints a picture about where our topic for the day really fits in with all of this. So let's get into strategy then. So how, from your experience and your perspective, how do you define strategy, and what does strategy even look like to you?
If you had asked me that probably 10 or 15 years ago, I would have really struggled to answer that. But I think it's become pretty clear over the years, Jamie. And I think strategy in itself is pretty simple, in that I've come to see it as the making of an integrated set of choices. And those choices in their entirety, their collection, really help a company to create competitive advantage in a sustainable way, and ultimately end up delivering value for stakeholders. And I think the types of choices that have to be made in an integrated strategy are things like, what's our aspiration? Where are we going to play? How are we going to win? What capabilities do we need to win? And what management systems need to be in place, for us to, achieve success. So for me, I think that's really the essence of what strategy is about. However, and I hope we start to get into some of this in our conversation, there's a lot more to strategy than just making a set of choices. And often I think we see it sort of in there and not really go much further beyond that. And so, I look forward to unpacking some of that in our conversation today.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. So I like that phrase, making an integrated set of choices. And first of all, I love the word integrated, because I think that's the key. It's the consistency, the internal consistency across those choices. And so I want to pick on that word choices though for a second. And I don't know if it's deliberate, so I'm really just curious. Is you didn't say an integrated set of decisions, you said choices. And my first reaction is maybe choices is a broader term than just decisions. So I'm just curious about that. What does set of choices even mean to you then?
Yeah. So, and I think this is where we get into, Jamie, the sort of the struggles in strategy. And so if we take a look at a good strategy, I think it does more than just urge an organization forward toward a goal or a vision, right? I think a good strategy honestly acknowledges through consensus and the major challenges, right? And this is where I think choices start to come into play. The major challenges being faced, and those choices lead to clarity around the approach that's going to be required to overcome those challenges in order to get the organization to a desired future. Yeah. And I think, as I reflect on that, Jamie, I'd also add to that is I think so if we take a look at, strategy and those choices, if we're really going to get great results from the strategy, I think what I've come to learn is those those choices need to translate into three phases. And the first phase is strategy definition. And this is, Nathan's language, right? So strategy definition, strategy deployment, and then strategy delivery. And I think the problem though, Jamie, is that we rarely see an organization doing a great job going beyond defining their top level strategy, which is, I think, really is just the beginning of the strategy efforts.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly see, more than a few organizations that, they finish their strategy. It's usually in the form of a PowerPoint deck. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but that's also where it ends, right? It's just, here's our deck, and we present it to the board, get approval, and now we're done. Now we go sort of back to work, right? But you identified, the capabilities needed to overcome those challenges, the management systems to put in place, things like that. And so, as you're looking at that in deployment and delivery, and I'll come back to deployment a bit. So let me kind of jump ahead to delivery.
Yeah.
How much of this is about is about problem solving? Meaning you face those challenges. Do we identify upfront the challenges we're going to face? Do we identify them once we face them, or is it a combination or a spectrum across all of that?
Yeah. No, I want to just build on your comment around the communication of, one slide deck, and how that kind of links into sort of solving problems, as an organization. So I'll give you an example, Jamie. I can't recall how many times I've seen a senior executive present the strategy in a town hall slide, followed by a very persuasive speech, mind you, but then that's followed by an email, right? And just emailing out the strategy. And when I have conversations with the leaders, it's really their expectation is that everyone is aligned and knows what to do. Unfortunately, when I go and I speak, with the people on the front lines of these organizations, they all say the same thing, which is, wow, this leader has no idea what I deal with on a daily basis, nor what I actually need in order to execute his or her strategy. And, the result, the result of that sort of, what I would call fire and forget strategy deployment, it ultimately means no strategy gets deployed. There's no plan, because as you said, the problem solving really hasn't occurred or trickled down in the organization as a result of that town hall slide. And as a result of no clarity around the problems that we have to go work on, there's no plan that has translated out of the strategy. And the strategy basically becomes the sum total of what everyone in the organization happens to be doing. And that's not problem solving. And we all know the outcome of that kind of situation. So, I think we have to get, clear around, how do we build a plan as an organization, right? And how do where does problem solving fit in the midst of doing that as well? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's, I like to say that, you have a strategic plan that's on paper, or not on paper, maybe it's digital, but you also have a strategy, and that's what everybody does every day, right? That's the culmination of everybody's actions and problem solves and choices is your actual strategy. It might not be the intended one, but it's what you end up with. And so it's really about that that connection between the two, right? So you talked about that as, strategy definition, which is sort of, that's the thinking part. It's not that this is just about documentation, but that is where we do sort of put the plan together, and the deployment, which is the connection, which is more than just emailing it out, and then of course the delivery, what we do every day. So that deployment becomes that key connection between definition and delivery, right? And so I what is a better way? How do you better effectively communicate the strategy? Obviously, just emailing it out isn't going to get the job done.
Right.
How do you more effectively communicate? Does everyone need to understand the strategy? Do they just need to understand where they fit in? Do they just need to know what to do? So how does it translate, and to who does it translate to?
Right. So Jamie, I think we do it via a two-way conversation. And I think that conversation has to cascade to every level in the organization. But we rarely see that. So how does it work, right? So I think, so the dialogue starts with the top level of the organization. And then they pass down the strategic goals to the next level. Level two then has to, use some facts, some dialogue, some problem solving. And they have to come together with some consensus and alignment, because strategic problems cross, they cross silos because they're big in nature. And they have to agree on what it is they're planning to achieve. What are the goals that they think are achievable, despite what the top level is asking for. So there's a bit of discovery that has to happen there using real facts. And at that point, I think level one and level two, they close the loop by reaching consensus on the goals and the plans. And that's, often referred to as the catchball process. But then that process just continues down to the next level. And I think what I see, Jamie, is that, some leaders feel uncomfortable with that dialogue because it feels like a negotiation. It's a two-way conversation. It's not like I had a town hall and you're clear. No, I have to open myself up, actually hear what the organization's response to that. But that's really what it is. It's a conversation to reach high agreement on the goals and the plans. And I think that's the alignment process. That's the precondition for improvement to occur.
Yeah, I like the term precondition. So the fact that it's a two-way conversation is an important part, right? It's not just, instead of email, you're going to go and present, or you're going to go talk to people, and the two-way conversation is more than saying, do you understand? And then getting a response back, yes, we understand. So I'll share a recent story. I won't share who this was, but they were basically given budget, and this isn't necessarily strategy, but they were given budget targets and, told to go build a budget that meets these targets. And then they tried to do that and said, it can't be done. Right? We can't get from here to there. There's things that we don't have control over that drive that. And they were just told, too bad, those are the targets. And so they're gonna start the year red. They're gonna finish the year red in terms of gap performance. And so there's a tendency to, once you get told, here's the target, here's what we need to achieve, it's like, well, okay, back to your belief in the possible. I'm not sure that's possible. What's my confidence level? Can I negotiate down the target so then I have a higher chance of success, and sandbag a little bit and make it more achievable? So I'll ask both a how and a what question around not being a negotiation. If it's not a negotiation, what does it more feel like? And how do we move it past being a negotiation to something that is more of a true two-way conversation?
Yeah, that's a good point, Jamie. And I think that's often what it is probably more of a negotiation of well, I want this, well, I'll give you that. And that's not really the way to think about it in good strategy deployment practices. It's it's really the hard work of going out and discovering the facts and getting clear around the current state, the current condition. And through the facts, we're now able to have a meaningful dialogue. And it's a the organization has to be in a growth mindset, obviously, where they're looking forward to challenge. They have to recognize that 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 if they don't achieve the target, that's okay. They're not going to be punished as a result of that. But that there's an expectation that we push toward what's possible and try to reach, a potential that, a threshold we haven't crossed before, and to be okay with pushing, and to be okay with actually going for breakthrough. And I think those conditions have to be in place for that conversation to be effective. In addition to the leader not accepting, a yes, no response from their request for the goal, but actually seeing the hard work that the team has done to try to understand how they would go deliver that and what the challenges will be and the trade-offs will be. And those are the choices and the conversations that have to happen as a part of, good communications in the strategy process.
Yeah. So you to take you on a little tangent here is, you talk about things like, looking forward to challenge, right? That's sort of a big cultural element, and the right behaviors that help enable this. So I guess my question is, I don't want to go through an inventory of behaviors, because there's probably a lot more that also enable that. But to make this work, does the culture have to come first to have a culture of things like looking forward to challenge, or do you build the culture through the catch ball and through these processes of strategic development?
Well, I don't think it's a one or the other kind of scenario. I think a company can choose its own path, and actually, I think it could be a combination of either one. Excuse me. I don't think it has to be. I don't think it's like only one answer. I think you could go either direction, and but in either case, in whichever direction you go, you still have to address the cultural issue. So it doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter if you address the cultural issue first and you have the patience to do that, or if you address the cultural issue while you're working through your strategy process. And maybe the driver of that just might be where you are in your strategy cycle. So if you're in the middle of, if you're on the cusp of about to launch your strategy refresh, well, that might be a good time to start to run a new experiment around how you're going to drive some different things in your culture. If you're in the middle of your strategy, maybe you might want to focus more on, for example, a little bit of culture, and you start it with a reflection and problem solving of how you just did in your last strategy cycle, and use that as input to kind of spur your culture change. So I think it really depends on where a company is, but in the end, as you say, I think it's in section 3 of your book, People Solve Problems. You can't get away from addressing the culture issue. I think you point out, Peter Drucker's comment, which is famously, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And so that's a classic, statement that is stood the test of time, and it's around today, I think, but because it has such a profound impact in its reminder of the importance of culture. So
yeah, and to take to make a really weird twist on the Drucker quote, you're really talking about the culture integration with strategy. And so maybe they belong on the same breakfast plate together, right? Because it's not one or the other. And some people, I think, mishear the Drucker quote. It's not one or the other, right? It's just both. But bad culture will make things like two-way conversations and catch ball more difficult, as well as delivery, right? So we talked a lot about the deployment, which is getting the consensus and the alignment and the commitment to pursue the strategy. And then you sort of go into phase 3, which is really delivery. And I'm sure that's not just, okay, now we're done with now everybody knows the strategy, now just go grind it out. That there's a lot of thought behind how execution of the strategy and the delivery of the strategy really works. So what does that look like? What does that execution or delivery look like to you?
Yeah, I think you're right, Jamie. So the dialogue and consensus, they aren't enough. It's a good start. But what I've come to learn in the good practices, we actually have to document our agreements in a delivery contract, because we need to hold ourselves accountable. It's basically a simple page table, and it captures the what, the how, the who, and how much by when. And I think that's where the strategy deployment planning phase ends, at the point, at that point of action, where the final contract in this whole planning process is in the form of an action plan. And the result of the whole alignment and, process is really a clear line of sight through the business between the vision that has been articulated and the action plans that we need to, take forward over the course of time.
No, that's good. And so again, accountable, right? That's another one of those cultural elements that comes out. Before we head towards a wrap up, I do want to ask about the effectiveness, how you measure the effectiveness a bit. And I'm really curious, is effectiveness of your strategy really just about the delivery? Is it a phase 3 thing? Or do you measure each of those phases differently? How do you measure the effectiveness of phase 1, which is your strategy definition, phase 2, your deployment, phase 3, your delivery? Is the effectiveness measured separately or all together as one big evaluation? How do you determine the effectiveness?
Yeah, so I think, Jamie, you're getting into some pretty advanced concepts on strategy deployment, which is really around the leading indicators and the lagging indicators. And I generally, I think the first step is to recognize, okay, we've got our dialogue and our agreement, we had our conversations, we've got our plan, and but we know that that's not enough. So how will we know if the plan that we agreed to is working? Well, we have to measure it, because one of the things I constantly remind leaders is we can't mistake activity for progress. So think about a basketball game, Jamie, right? So, a big part of what makes the basketball game exciting is the scoreboard. It's hanging right in the middle of the arena. And I don't know if you've seen some of these scoreboards lately, but they're massive and they've got all kinds of bells and whistles all around them. It's there to let everyone know if they're winning or losing. And, when a team is struggling with the game plan, they call a timeout, right? They go fix the issue. And in strategy delivery, we call this check and adjust. And it just starts by identifying the strategic metrics and the targets, that we align on, and the ones that are going to let us know if we're winning or losing. And when an issue arises, meaning a metric goes into the red, we need to have clear expectations on how the team is going to respond. And those expectations need to be very simple and standard, like filling out an issue response sheet. But here's the thing, what I've come to learn is for this check and adjust, part of strategy to really work, leaders have to evaluate progress of those metrics and targets monthly. And if you think about, close scoring basketball games, right? The intensity doesn't really decline in the final minutes or seconds. It actually grows, right? So leaders, they need to engage as intensely in month 12 as they are in month 1. Why? Because day-to-day actions take priority. And without a review system, this metric system in place that holds the strategic actions in equal importance, the strategic plans can get torpedoed. I think that's an important lesson to kind of take away in good strategy deployment.
That's really good. And I'm a big soccer guy, right? I think basketball and soccer make for different analogies. When the basketball score, you're scoring all throughout the game. Soccer, you might win 1-0 with 2 minutes left, and so you really depend upon leading indicators, because you can't see how the score is ebbing and flowing. There might be no score for quite a while. Quite a different, and there's no timeouts. There's a halftime, but that's all you get. So let's just kind of wrap this up. This is not just say a service you provide. This has really been a sort of personal journey of discovery, of connection between lean and strategy, and connecting that to sustainability and challenges like emissions and energy. So as you kind of wrap up or summarize your key lessons around strategy, what does it all mean to you? If you could sort of take us home with that last perspective.
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this quite a bit, Jamie, lately, and I think this call is timely. There's a 2015 Harvard Business Review article. I think the title is "Why Strategy Execution Unravels," and they cite that 3/4 of large organizations struggle with implementing their strategy. And it's hard for me to get my head around that, because in Lean, we have one of the most well-documented and proven approaches to strategy deployment ever created. So why is it that so many organizations still struggle with strategy? And I reflect on this in this conversation we're having today. And I think, and upon reading your book, People Solve Problems, and there are some things that come to me. And I think one is, it's because organizations have failed to make the intangible tangible, which you talk quite a bit about in section 3 of your book, where, without a culture, and I think we need to understand the importance of people and building a learning culture. I think, I don't think that we have really grasped the importance of that. And I think you do a really great job, in your work in helping to bring that out and making the case for that. And here's the thing, Jamie, I think strategy, as I work with most leaders in most organizations, I think strategy is all too often viewed as a dreaded event, right? And I think we have the opportunity to see it as one of the most powerful mechanisms for setting and meeting ambitious and exciting goals for the organization. And I think I'd like to end with 2 challenges for our podcast listeners. And one is to commit to continued growth in the organization's capability for strategy excellence, and to do that in every annual strategy refresh cycle that you have. Make that commitment to grow in your capability. And I think number 2 challenge is let's face it, developing the organization is hard work. It's on top of everything else we got to do. So the second, I think, challenge here is commit to finding an excellent coach that's going to help you accelerate your learning and your impact, and not let you up on the hard work that's required to grow the organization. So I think for me, Jamie, I think those are, a couple of key, takeaways and challenges I hope, all leaders can resonate with and take on.
Well, I love how you brought it back to people in the end, right? So, none of this happens without people, without their capabilities, their leadership, and so I think that is a great ending note to wrap up on. So, appreciate you sharing your perspective. We'll include in the show notes, how to contact you and find you and learn more. And really appreciate everyone who listens in. And my best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, for having me today. I enjoyed it.